Welcome to ZekeTalk. My name is Jim Tudor. I'm the co-founder and website manager of ZekeFilm.org. That's ZekeKEFILM.org. And with me is an occasional contributor to the site and silent film aficionado, David L. Gill. David, where are you?
I'm right here. Great to be here with you.
All right. Well, we're here to discuss not only silent film and all of its appeal and importance. We're doing so on the occasion of the Blu-ray release of this film. It's a Gloria Swanson film from 1923, and it is called Zaza. Kino Classics just put this out in the month of June. And it is, I was unfamiliar with this film. Dave, had you seen this film or knew about this film previously?
I did not know about the film at all. My understanding is that this is the first time it's ever been released to home video ever. So it was really impressive to see, especially given that Swanson enjoyed making it so much. But yeah, I was completely unaware of this film prior to Kino sending out the feelers and saying, hey, we've got this new film.
Yes, and apparently it's one of several Gloria Swanson films from the Paramount Vault that Kino is going to be putting out. Am I correct on that?
That sounds familiar, but I would have to track that down exactly.
Okay, I believe there's at least one more, and the title eludes me, so maybe one day we'll come back and cover that one as well. One thing I wanted to say, my own personal depth of knowledge on silent film is not nearly what yours is. So that said, hopefully I can be forgiven for coming on here and having only been familiar with Gloria Swanson in the context of Sunset Boulevard.
Right.
I have a little knowledge previously to watching Zaza of what her silent film persona was. Mm-hmm. And how what type of films she made.
Yeah, so she's a very interesting person to study, both in terms of just who she was and who she was as an actress specifically. She was discovered doing comedy. And she didn't want to do comedy. She didn't enjoy pratfalls. She thought she was going to hurt herself. And so she struck out on her own to try to get good dramatic roles. And Cecil B. DeMille stumbled across her. And so by the time she was about 17 or 18, she was making huge productions for Cecil B. DeMille. She was in 3 of his marital comedies, Why Change Your Wife, Don't Change Your Husband, and Male and Female, all before 1920. And in those films, she usually played someone that was very rich. And people often pejoratively referred to her as a clothes horse. DeMille's own daughter referred to her that way and did not have a very high opinion of her acting. Now, she was conscious of this even back then, and so she wanted to do other films that would show her range of acting. And so going from the genteel sorts of roles that she'd played in Why Change Your Wife and Don't Change Your Husband, she started varying her on-screen repertoire. Zaza is one example of that, because even though she's a very famous person, she's a very tacky famous person. And then even further, she went in the direction of a common working girl in 1924 with a movie like Manhandled, which I believe is the other film. Now that I'm thinking about it, that's the other film they're going to release. So and I've seen a copy of it from Grapevine Video, so I'm familiar with it. But she wanted to show to herself and to her fans that she was able to act in a variety of modes. And she's really quite impressive, I think, both in Zaza and in Manhandled. So, but anyway, that's her on-screen persona. She did a lot to try to vary it. Even going so far as to playing a nun in Queen Kelly, the not terribly well-released Queen Kelly, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, that's the one, isn't it? That's the film that she watches in Sunset Boulevard.
Correct.
with her butler, who is played by Eric von Stroheim, the original director of Queen Kelly. So it's all very wonderfully meta.
Right, and that was something that he actually suggested to her. And so for years, that was the only clip. Everyone knew it came from Queen Kelly, but no one had seen anything else besides that one little clip that's in Sunset Boulevard. So,
well, speaking of Sunset Boulevard, as I'm wont to do, the waxworks of Sunset Boulevard scene. There's the scene, of course, in the film where she has silent film cohorts, Buster Keaton. And one of them is H.B. Warner.
H.B. Warner, yes. Oh, yes.
He's the male lead here in Zaza.
Which is so odd. Okay, so let me just say something about H.B. Warner. As the booklet for Zaza points out, H.B. Warner is best known as playing Jesus in the 1927 Cecil B. DeMille production King of Kings. And so knowing that this was 4 years previous, I was still impressed with how old he seemed. He is not a young man in Zaza, but it was just so odd to see someone that I knew would play Jesus play a philandering politician, a civil servant. It was just so weird to see, but it really kind of gave me a good idea of the range of acting that he was capable of. Because really the only thing I think I'd seen of him besides Sunset Boulevard was King of Kings. And so this was really a treat for me to kind of get more familiar with his work as well.
I've seen him turn up here and there in the post-silent era. But as far as his silent film heyday, I'm with you. I think he's fantastic as Jesus in King of Kings, by the way. I think that's a terrific film, and it is available on the Criterion Collection. And it's one of these Criterion releases that's kind of off everybody's radar at this point. It's unheralded. But you know, back when that one came out, it was one of these early 2-disc special editions with a nice fat case. Looks great on the shelf. I would recommend that film for anyone else interested in silent films and why Cecil B. DeMille matters in film history. He's not just this maker of
bloated
driven spectacle that we associated with the Ten Commandments from the 1950s. But anyhow, H.B. Warner, he had a very dry, almost Peter Cushing-like presence to me in Zaza.
Yes, I would agree with that entirely.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing. But, you know, he is this very, you know, buttoned up, almost boring man. Like you say, he's the philandering, you know, rich guy, the love interest, who basically is here to, you know, break her heart. Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic because, as you mentioned, Gloria Swanson is so just, you know, flouncy is the word they use, you know.
And effervescent. She's on fire the whole time. Like, there are very few scenes that she comes off as being sedate. And, you know, but there was a really interesting moment in the film. They're on a boat reading, and she has tried to get him to stay on the boat with her, and they're docked, but they're sitting under this big willow that reminded me a little bit of The Great Bartolese with John Gilbert. And so the kind of the foliage that they were going through in that movie. But they're sitting there reading, and she kind of throws a bit of a temper tantrum. And up to this point in the film, she has really seemed like a child. Like, she's got about the emotional control of a 5-year-old, as far as I read it. And in this moment, she starts to throw a bit of a fit. He leans in to kiss her. They peck. And then the grin she gives indicates that she has matured. She has begun to mature, because she sort of grins more like a 16-year-old would, as opposed to throwing a pitch fit like what, you know, like what a 5-year-old would do. So it was really quite interesting to see her kind of move along in terms of character development. She did not play a very static, staid sort of person. She not only is immature, but she grows through the entire movie.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. I mean, you know, she's clearly somebody who's, like you say, a spoiled child. That's a great analogy. she's a famous celebrity in the, what do we call this? The kind of a French vaudeville scene.
French vaudeville scene, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so she's a big star that everybody is coming to these halls to see perform. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they just have to get through all these other acts to get to Zaza.
Right.
And the first thing we see her do is swing. You know, she's on the swing, the swinging act, swinging out over the audience and kicking off her shoes, again, like a child. You know, she's on, we could call it, you know, playground equipment, you know, very ornate flower decorated playground equipment. And the act is she swings out there and she kicks off her shoe, which that's referenced here on the cover, this wonderful cover of this Blu-ray. Her shoe goes flying, and that's part of it. Yeah, no, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So I found the so Alan Dwan was a very famous and capable, more than capable director, both in the silent and sound era. He has a really long list of films that most people these days have not seen, but he really demonstrates that what will draw people in are not necessarily the big spectacle scenes. His films tend to center around the one-on-one interactions that different characters play. We can see that in the way that his 1923 Robin Hood played out. We can see that in the scenes in this film. People are very drawn in by the way he'll get two very different people to interact with each other. And I think that's super important, especially in storytelling. And we honestly could learn a few lessons of it today. I think that movies, it's kind of reminiscent of the movies, and I'm blanking on them now because I'm on camera, but the one that you had me review, that wasn't a silent film a few years ago. You didn't get to the...
Was it To the Wonder? I know you wrote about...
Yeah, it was To the Wonder.
Terrence Malick.
It was To the Wonder. Yeah. Right. Terrence Malick seems to be, whether he realizes it or not, taking a page from the playbook of Alan Dwan, and the way he'll have two characters sort of playing off each other. Everything from the incredibly intimate scenes where H.B. Warner and Gloria Swanson are together in the frame, to the scenes where he and the other woman who plays his wife in the film, they are very divided. They are not together in any sort of emotional sense, and he will deliberately frame them in separate frames, while in separate shots, while they have a conversation. So it's really interesting to watch. You know, good filmmaking's good filmmaking, and Malick, I think, is someone who understands what Dwan understood seemingly reflexively.
That's a very interesting comparison that I frankly wasn't expecting, Dave. You know, Terrence Malick, and To the Wonder being such a derided film of his. I wonder how Zaza was received. I'm not entirely sure, because I failed to do this part of the research on my part. But no, me too. Right. But I tend to think that because it was Gloria Swanson, it probably did okay. There were very few of her films that were just utter flops. And this, I'm pretty sure, was one of the ones that would have been fairly well received. It's not one of her best, but it is one of her most fun that I've seen. I would say that, you know, if you're looking for something that's super serious, where she's kind of a couple of rungs below a cabaret singer, I would say probably Sadie Thompson is the place to look, because she actually plays in, well, they don't say this directly in the film because of censorship concerns, but in the play Rain, which is what Sadie Thompson is based on, she actually plays a hooker. And so she's a hooker that shows up at this island and is then harassed by this do-gooder, who in the play is a preacher, played by John Barrymore. And so if you want to see a really deep, her sinking herself into a really deep role, meaningful role, Sadie Thompson is a really good one for that. But she just had such a breadth that she could make a very kind of sappy love story. Not that this is overly sappy, but it's definitely saccharine in places. And then go from that to
the sort of depth of acting you see in either Sadie Thompson or even Sunset Boulevard, it's just really testifies to the fact that for whatever reason, Cecil B. DeMille's daughter was just really angry that she wasn't Gloria Swanson, because she speaks so horribly of her and all the histories. But I'm really impressed with Gloria Swanson, and I think that that while this film isn't, you know, a cinematic masterpiece, it's definitely a wonderful example of great entertainment that Gloria Swanson was able to produce.
Yeah, it's. I'll tell you what. As a reviewer, watching the disc the other night, I agree with all you're saying about Gloria Swanson and her take on this character. Which, by the way, according to the booklet in here, which fed terrific essay by Imogen Sarah Smith, by the way.
Yes.
I read this and I read that and very much enjoyed it and appreciated that that was included here.
Yes.
That you know, this is the second take on Zaza as a film adaptation. It was done previously, even in the earlier era of filmmaking, and then again they did it later, and I don't remember. I think was it 1938? In the
30s, yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's interesting that they've had several takes on this material, and yet this is my own first exposure to this as a property, period.
Right, but I think Claudette Colbert, who played Zaza in the 1938 remake, I'm fairly certain that the only film of hers I've ever seen is probably It Happened One Night, 1933. I don't think I've seen anything else of hers. So,
well, she's fantastic.
Oh yeah, she definitely is.
Yeah, and you know, the DeMille film, I believe, is which the you'd probably be very interested to see the pre-code film. What is the title with the Christians and they're feeding them to the lions and Sign of the Cross.
Oh,
I've seen that. I think she's in Sign of the Cross.
Okay,
and I believe in the Milk Bath.
Okay,
where you know she you know very. Let's just say she's in the milk bath right up to the edge of the milk bath.
Naturally.
And, yes, and it's very pre-code.
Yes.
And it's an example of one of these films, you know, where it is Cecil B. DeMille being pious with the Bible and faith, which apparently, you know, he was a believer. And yet he, you know, imbued these films with this raciness, this scandalous, these scandalous qualities, these kind of, you know, kind of leering, you know, naughtiness in these movies, and it's this odd double standard that everybody now.
Well, even his daughter called that out in a documentary that was made in the late 70s, early 80s by Kevin Brownlow and David Gill, no relation. And his daughter talked about how he was very pious, but if he was going to show divine judgment, he was going to show you exactly why God was angry first. And so he had this very sort of interesting relationship with spirituality and sensuality. And it can almost come across like, well, sensuality gets you in trouble and purity gets you good with God. But I think that's a really reductionistic way to read what he is presenting. I think he's usually very clear, or very nuanced, I should say. So not always clear to the observer, but he's very nuanced with his presentation of what evil actually involves, and what sensuality, what negative sensuality involves for him. And so his religious films are truly magnificent. And I think that if your exposure, dear reader, is only with his 1956 Ten Commandments, I would suggest you go back and watch things like King of Kings, like the 1923 Ten Commandments, like, you know, any of those films, because he has a much more reverent, I think, tone with the material than someone like Henry King does. Henry King tends to play fast and loose with scriptural situations, especially in David and Bathsheba, but DeMille tends to be a little bit, he seems to have an impulse to be a little more true to the material. And he is still a product of his time, but even so, he, to my mind, he's a little closer to what Scripture would have to say, and those sorts of, that sort of carefulness.
And we ought to let our audience know about you that you are a seminary graduate.
Yes.
And so you know what you're talking about in this regard. You're not just a silent film aficionado. And a lot of times, you know, silent film buffs do make their way into the pre-code era as a point of interest as well. And Cecil B. DeMille, just a moment of to promote content on ZekeFilm.org and self-promote. I have an essay there. It's if you search out 1920s Hollywood or Cecil B. DeMille on our search bar, it should come up a quote-unquote cover story, which is my essay on Hollywood in the 1920s. And I do get into this more for anybody who's interested about the importance of Cecil B. DeMille and what he brought to the table in early filmmaking in those so formative and active and vibrant and alive years of the art form, the 1920s.
Yeah.
He did not direct Zaza. We should.
No, he did not. He did not. Alan Dwan did, but it's, Yes.
But Alan Dwan had a great career. They talk about in the booklet as well that he worked for 50 years in the business, spanning all kinds of genres and doing well in them.
Yeah, I mean, if you can direct someone like Douglas Fairbanks, you pretty much are an okay director as far as I'm concerned, because someone like Douglas Fairbanks would have had to be notoriously difficult to direct, not because he was a difficult person, but because when you get to that level of acting and agility, it's just virtually impossible to try to rein that in. And so Alan Dwan is really, I think, a true artist of film that I think more people need to be aware of.
Yeah, and I definitely need to catch up on my Alan Dwan. I was meaning to watch, prior to covering Zaza here, another silent film of his that I have called Frontier Marshal. I believe it's a silent. I haven't watched it. It's a Western. And that one came with the John Ford at Fox box set, if you're familiar with this. It's about, from 10 years ago, 20th Century Fox put out a DVD set of all of John Ford's films that they have in their holding. And, it includes a lot of silent work. And with it, they threw in this other film that is not John Ford's, it's Alan Dwan's Frontier Marshal, as something that greatly inspired the aesthetic of John Ford. And I regret that I didn't get to look at it in this context, because it was the perfect excuse to finally watch this Frontier Marshal disc I've had sitting around for 10 years.
Right. So I'm curious, what did you think about the sets in Zaza?
Interesting. Not exactly what I was expecting. It seems to be kind of a mid-range film as far as its scope. It is not trying to hit us over the head with a lot of lavish production value, but it's got it where it counts. It's a film that, in terms of its, not just its sets, its locations, also its wardrobe, it's upscale. But I didn't find it to be like ringingly, show off level upscale. It is, there's something reined in about it, which I think is respectable. It's almost humble in this era, particularly when you have guys like von Stroheim building. Entire cities, on
the back lot at Universal, Yeah, I found it really interesting. Dwan and his set designer very clearly spent a lot of time figuring out how they wanted the staging to work, because and how they wanted the set to work, because in most of her scenes, whenever she's in one of her dwellings, there's constant clutter. It's everywhere. It's not in complete disarray, but it's just a very busy set. And when you then go to the home of H.B. Warner, it's very very clean. The ceilings are extremely high. Everything's really far apart. The piano's a grand piano instead of an upright. You know, things like that that are just little touches. It was really fascinating to see how you sort of see the inner turmoil, the inner anxiety of Zaza working itself out into the way she decorates.
Indeed.
So,
yeah, no, and that's a great observation. Another strength of this film, which I will admit at this point that I did not love on the whole. This is a film that I come away respecting more than
enjoying.
Yeah. I was kind of taken aback by that because I expected to fall right into this thing, being a fan of melodrama, being a fan of film history, and this you know, insatiable film buff thirst that you know, people like us have to discover something that's new to us. And yet there's an aspect of this this wonderful Blu-ray, by the way, fantastic restoration. It looks and sounds good.
Yes.
Yet I actually did fall asleep in the middle of the movie.
I did too, twice.
Yeah, and I don't feel good about that. That's not something that happens often. I had to come back for night 2 of Zaza, which, you know, for a film that is not 90 minutes.
No, 84 minutes, as I recall. Yeah.
Correct. This, you know, that shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
So,
so for me, I won't try to guess what your problem was, but I know for me, part of it was honestly the soundtrack. Now, what I really love about silent films, especially the ones that Kino Lorber put out, is that they are at least informed by original cue sheets. Having scored a silent film myself, I tried to use the original cue sheets on that film and was largely successful, and so I understand the sort of work that goes into this. So perhaps the fault can be better attributed to whoever compiled the soundtrack, the original soundtrack. The difficulty that I found was that it was so incredibly busy that it sort of was just this constant din of noise, and it sort of lulled me to sleep, even though it's constantly moving music. And so I felt like there was no moment in which I could sort of take a breath. I felt like when she finally figured out that H.B. Warner had a wife and kid, spoiler alert, it really, I mean, they're pretty upfront about that in the movie, but she doesn't know it. And so I felt like even when that realization sort of settled, the motion on screen allowed that to sink in and the grief to be made manifest. But I didn't feel like the soundtrack adequately slowed down for me to feel like there was actually a pause there. And that's just one example. But having said that, I really think that Jeff Rapsis is a wonderful pianist. I really enjoyed his skill. I didn't hear any sour notes the whole time, and I did watch it twice. So I think he's a very capable film accompanist. I found the score to be excessively busy.
Right, and that may be a fault. Just going back to the original 1923 cue sheets, I don't know who to point the finger at there, but yes, it's a very busy film that I suppose it wore us out.
Yeah,
you know, which is unfortunate. You know that silent film gets a bad enough rap these days with this perception that it's old and stodgy and boring.
Right.
This is not the case here.
No.
If anything, what you're saying, it's testament to the opposite. It's too much. It's you know, little Michael Bay syndrome set in here. Where like,
yes.
Yeah, I'm being overloaded with stimuli here. So yeah, there was a disconnect there for me, which is unfortunate. But that said, it's not a deal breaker.
No, no, it's still this is the sort of complaint that one has in the 21st century, in the second decade of the 21st century, where we have fabulous restorations, we have well-recorded soundtracks. This is not the day of the bargain bin VHS in a Walgreens or a CVS. This is top-notch. The music is actually rooted in history. This is not the same 4 organ pieces dubbed behind a scratchy Raymond Rohrhauer print that someone pirated that they're selling for $5. This is good, historically informed restoration and playing, and it somehow just doesn't work. But this is for me. But it's still a fabulous restoration. It's still a fabulous film to take in. And, you know, maybe someday I'll try my hand at accompanying it myself, but it's totally worth the purchase price. And I purchased it. So it's wonderful, but it's just a really busy score. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's one thing that I do really appreciate, though, in watching this is there's several scenes in the film where characters on screen are playing the piano.
Yes.
And it seems to all of a sudden when you cut to a character who's with their fingers on the keys playing whatever it is they're playing, it suddenly falls right into that groove. And so we are hearing that as source music.
Yes.
And it's effortless.
Right. And that was really wonderful because he does go back and forth from different themes. Like if they're showing one character to another character, he has the ability to really turn on a dime, and that's the mark of a good silent film accompanist. And so I was very impressed with that. I would agree with that.
Well, all right. I believe we have covered Zaza pretty well. There is an audio commentary here. I listened to,
which was wonderful.
Yeah, I was listening to that the other night too. We mentioned the booklet, and that's it for bonus features on this Blu-ray.
Yeah. It's very bare bones, but it's well produced.
Absolutely. And as you say, this is the first time we believe that this film is available in any form for us to consider. There's still, this having been out for less than a month, this Blu-ray, and you do have to go out of your way to get it. You have to order it online. You can't just run to your near, Best Buy, or they don't deal with films like this.
Right. No.
So it is a boutique release. But again, it's absolutely worthwhile. So hats off to our friends at Kino Lorber for making this possible, and we do hope for more of this, and look forward to the next Gloria Swanson release.
Definitely, can't wait.
Yeah. So, Dave, any other films that have caught your eye lately that you want to give a quick shout out to?
Sure. So I've been following a couple of folks on Kickstarter, and a Marion Davies costume drama called When Knighthood Was in Flower has been put out by Ben Modell, and my copy apparently is on its way in the mail. I do believe it releases in September. That information's on Amazon. And then another fellow put out a disc that was that is a restoration of Little Orphaned Annie with Colleen Moore, and it's really a cool movie. It's not a cinematic masterpiece in some ways, but in other ways it really is. It's a very fanciful representation of the James Whitcomb Riley poem, which does not have anything whatsoever to do with the Annie comic strip or the Annie musical. So let's just put that out there. And I was drawn to that film, I think, because my great-grandmother, who was a native of Indiana, which James Whitcomb Riley is from Indiana, she had memorized the poem Little Orphaned Annie in school, and so she would recite it to us when we were little kids. And so I have fond memories of hearing her recite the poem, and then watching the poem come to life on screen is really, it's really a treat. So it's very exciting. He worked alongside the fellow who put that together, worked alongside the Library of Congress, and some of the scenes only exist in a Video Master, so he didn't even have film to work with. So you see varying quality across the board, but he's done a wonderful job matching it all up. So those two, I think, are the two that I've seen that I've really enjoyed the most lately.
All right, that sounds fantastic. And I just want to point out for our viewers, if you're watching this on YouTube, or our listeners, if you're hearing it as audio, that ZekeFilm.org, unrelated to the silent era, other than this is general movie talk, we do have some new exciting content. Just today I posted a guest review by Dr. Mark Eckel, who is a theologian and author and public speaker and film buff. And Mark has gone ahead and reviewed the film The Hero for us for ZekeFilm. And it's a wonderful, little, very concise, very personal review of this new film starring Sam Elliott that is out in theaters right now. Eric Yates has already reviewed it for Zeke. So we've got 2 reviews of The Hero now to choose from. And I would just want to make sure people have a chance to see those reviews in their consideration of seeing that film. Also, I should be posting a video essay by a filmmaker named Adam Zanzi, who is a former St. Louisan who is now living out in LA. He's created a wonderful 15-minute video essay on The Fox and the Hound. We'll be hosting that on our site and doing a little bit of background on why Adam felt compelled to do a 15-minute video essay on Disney's Fox and the Hound. So do go to ZekeFilm.org soon and check all that out. We also have a new film of a new review of the film Baby Driver by director Edgar Wright. It's the film of the summer. It is reviewed by myself and Eric Yates. So those are just a few things going on with our site. Dave here has been kind enough to guest, as a contributor, to review silent films for the site. You can read his writing there. He writes as well as he speaks, and that's fantastic.
Thank you.
David L. Gill, everybody, no relation to the other historian David Gill, as he pointed out, but that's okay. That's okay. It's we're happy to have you.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, it's ZekeTalk, and we'll be back with a new episode of the general ZekeTalk later. Dean Treadway is going to join Michael Anderson and myself to talk about more Blu-rays from our friends at Kino Lorber, who are kind enough to send us these review discs, and we'll be covering some other things as well. So definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, ZekeFilm's YouTube channel, where you can find all the episodes of ZekeTalk, and let us know what you think. I'm Jim Tudor, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.